There are generally two views regarding the role of writers, artists, etc. vis-a-vis society. And not only writers and artists, but uh, by implication, writings and art. On the one hand, moralists like Matthew Arnold, Lewis, then Marxists, feminists, all such groups believe that writers and writings have a positive role to play vis-a-vis society. Even Bakhtin spoke about art and answerability. On the other hand, there are people who believe that art exists for its own sake. You know, what we call aestheticism loosely, though aestheticism proper was a definite movement, but in time, in history, but before and after, that is still date, there are people who still believe in the autonomous identity of art or literature, that is art for art's sake. Now, true art remains just as a finished piece of work. This is nothing to do with society or changing human nature and the like. Uh, Post colonial writers, by and large, of course, this term post colonial we are using uh, at hindsight or with hindsight, they do not subscribe to this theory. And Chinua Achebe's The Novelist as Teacher, this particular essay, is a categorical assertion of the writer's or the novelist's role as an anti colonial fighter. Now, he says in that essay that no self respecting writer or artist will take instructions from his or her audience, right? But at the same time, there is no rigid boundary. As and when necessary, they can take inputs from society, but all the while, the artists, novelists, writers, you know, as we choose to call him or her, should be committed to the betterment of society. So he says that we have been, or say African writers have been following Western conventions, traditions without customizing it to the post colonial situation in Africa. We can say the same thing about India largely. And here, one point, it's very interesting. Here you'll find how Achebe is different from Tagore or Gandhi that we have been discussing all along, especially vis-a-vis their Tagore's and Gandhi's protest against industrialism. So I read, why should I start waging war on as a Nigerian newspaper editor was doing the other day on the soulless efficiency of Europe's industrial and technological civilization, when the very thing my society needs may well be a little technical efficiency? That is, that African society needs technical efficiency. Without it, it will be lagging behind contemporary West and the world. But uh, it doesn't mean to, he doesn't mean at all that the traditional African society was in any way lesser than European society. And this is, he says, a sin that Africans have committed by accepting their racial inferiority. The situation was same in Africa. People like Tagore, Gandhi, before them Vivekananda, repeatedly kept saying that we are in no way inferior to the Europeans. After coming back from America, Vivekananda used to tell, Indian men, especially youth, men and women, that an American boy believes that he can do everything. Where is that faith among Indians? Why have you lost your faith? Stand on your own feet. Arise, awake, and stop not till the goal is reached. Those famous words of Vivekananda. So, Similarly, Achebe is playing this role here. This is anti-colonial. That is, colonialism may have been over, direct colonialism, but the psychological effects of colonialism continues. As I said in my other videos, we always model ourselves on the European man, women, in our case especially British. Though there are other varieties of colonialism, but British, since we are enslaved by the British, how we would speak more like the British, or how we would, or how can we dress a little better than the British, or how we can learn, adequately the table manners of the British. So, if you speak in Indian English accent or Indian English, that is shameful. If we eat without the dining table and chair on the ground as Indians, that is shameful. So everything that relates to us is shameful, that we have been taught or we allowed ourselves to be taught during colonialism. And these feelings of shame or these feelings of inferiority have not left us when the British left. The situation is same in India as it is in Africa, as same in India as it is in Africa. So, if I were God, I am quoting, I would regard as the very worst our acceptance for whatever reason of racial inferiority. It is too late in the day to get worked up about it or to blame others, much as they may deserve such blame and condemnation. What we need to do is to look back and try to find out where we went wrong, where the rain began to beat us. Let me give one or two examples of the result of the disaster brought upon the African psyche in the period of subjection to alien races. So, we must go back to find out, conferences are being held on the relevance of post-colonialism for the single most important reason. It is very relevant till date that our very self-fashioning, if I am to use a word by Greenblatt, even the very fact that I have to use Greenblatt and not Vivekananda for legitimacy shows how colonially we are still enslaved anyway. So, is that the very way we have fashioned ourselves, our dress, our appearance, loosely or perfectly, are all imitations of the British or the Europeans. So the mimic man we are snipers, the mimic man. All these are related in post-colonial papers. So we here he means actually Africans in general and writers in particular. They must try to look at the point exactly, genealogy, like Foucault's genealogy, where things started going wrong. As Gandhi said in Hind Swaraj, that it is not the British but the British in Indians which is helping the British continue in India with their imperial rule. Anyway, the two examples that he gives here are famous. You have read the essay. One is how maple dance is being replaced by Nigerian dance on the one hand, and on the other hand, see how they did away with using their earthen pots, which are very eco-friendly also, we can now add. We also had our earthen pots, our cooking. Even if you go to Calcutta, till date some earthen pots are used for serving tea, which are more eco-friendly, but we started using plastic, though we said it was for convenience, but then there was a kind of psychic feeling about being modernized in rejecting the other things and going for the plastic, steel, etc. So this examples is given. So it says, today things have changed a lot, but it would be foolish to pretend that we have fully recovered from the traumatic effects of our first confrontation with Europe. 3 or 4 weeks ago, my wife, this incident I have narrated in another video, that is when a boy was to write about an African weather called Harmattan. He wrote about winter. Then wife asked, Chinua Achebe's wife, who is a school teacher, that why are you writing about winter when all you mean is Harmattan? He said that if he writes about African weather, then he will be laughed at as bushman by his classmates. So just compare it with the video I have shared, a talk rather I have given on Ngugi wa Thiong'o's Kenyan situation after 1952 emergency, how it was imposed on all school going children that they must not speak in their native language in the classes, inside the classes. In fact, even in India, the very word native meant, uh, you know, of low category, like Caliban. If you read this 19th century Bengali literature of colonial encounter, the term is used pejoratively, of course, from a British point of view, native with bo, Bangla bo. So now he says that of, and another thing that we must do is that it is time, we means Africans, he said, that we must cultivate an anti-racist racism. He borrows here from Sartre. You see, racism in itself is bad. But to counter racism imposed on you by victorious races or colonizing races, you can say that yes, we are also great. We are not only as great, but we are greater than you. So if an American is proud of his American exceptionalism, an African can be proud of African exceptionalism, an Indian, and Assamese, a Bengali, they can all be, counter colonialism, strategic essentialism. Just as Tagore uses racism in America to counter America's charges or Europe's charges regarding caste bias in India. In itself, casteism or racism, etc., are no good. But to counter one essentialism, you can use another strategically. That is what Gayatri Spivak called strategic essentialism. So nationalism can also be strategic essentialism. Well, nationalisms, as Tagore said, are not good. But then to counter, say, American nationalism, we must use Indian nationalism. Or to counter Chinese nationalism, we must use, Indian nationalism that way. That is, it is like writing under erasure of Derrida. We internally do not believe in any essential superiority of any nation, any race, etc. But to counter other people's, similar assertions, we must be ready to fight back. Now, these are all part of his anti-colonial struggle. He is not going to the field to fight, that armies and soldiers and freedom fighters have done, but equally important is through your writing, through your novels like Things Fall Apart, Arrows of God, Anthills of Savannah, so many, by Achebe, you are uncovering the layers of colonial domination which have overtaken the African psyche. Now, finally, he says that, African historians go into the history of Africa, African political scientists concern themselves with the politics of Africa. Why should African literary creators be exempted from the services that they themselves recognize as genuine? This was the problem I have discussed with you while teaching Gugi, that unlike India, where almost all the established literatures has had their departments from almost the very beginnings of colonial universities. Very soon we had Bengali department, then later Assamese and Hindi. But in Africa, for a very long period of time, literature departments meant only English departments. One of the reason being that African literature was primarily oral, the traditional, and they were just gathering modern literature, and they did not think it fit to be taught. So he says that while African historians are dealing with African history, African scientists are dealing with African science, why should not African writers be dealing with things African? So he says that, a palm tree can be as fit a subject for poetry as the daffodils. We always think that earlier, or even these days, Anglicized people think that we cannot write poems about a coconut or palm tree because these are Indian or African, not European. We must write about, these other things, daffodils and chrysanthemums, etc. Not that. The English language, maybe there is a medium, but you bring that. So, his main job, he says, is to teach my readers that their past with all its imperfections was not one long night of savagery from which the first Europeans acting on God's behalf delivered them. First Europeans acting on God's behalf means missionaries. So Africans must regain their faith in themselves. This is the colonial, anti-colonial struggle that is put forward by Achebe in his Novelist as a teacher, and to all his works. We may treat Novelist as a teacher as a manifesto, post-colonial manifesto, like Communist Manifesto, post-colonial writers' manifesto of what he is going to do in his other works or what he has already done in his other works. All the best.